Overreaction to Deepseek is ridiculous. It's a joke. To me, it's actually been telling just from the reactions that various different kinds of people have had, how little they understand of AI. To start with Deepseek itself, they're doing the same kind of thing that everybody's doing. Tweaking LLMs, they're doing this improvement, that improvement. The most famous quote in all this, I think, was Mark Andreessen saying like, wow, this is one of the greatest breakthroughs I've ever seen. What is he talking about? It's progress, but it's not a breakthrough. You can talk with other AI researchers like, looking at the whole LLM stack of things, there is so much room to make things faster, right? You see these papers coming out, like they cut a factor of 2, they cut a factor of 5, but I think people don't realize just how much improvement there is to be had in just making the algorithms better. The operative question, if you're playing the market, is like, is Nvidia stock now undervalued over, is it a buy, sell, or hold? You could make an argument that like, well, maybe this was an overreaction, but it was overhyped anyway, so good. It's closer to its true value now. You could also say like, well, it went down, and now as people absorb what's really going on, and it's not spectacular, it's gonna go up again, right? Because everybody's trying to crowd into the trade, the market overreacts, which is why it's so bumpy, right?
Welcome to the SVIC podcast, where we deliver tech insights without the hype. Join my co-host, Joe Ternasky, and me, Jordan Thibodeau, as we break down the latest in tech, cut through the hype, and host top industry guests for exclusive insights. Pedro Domingos is here. He's Professor Emeritus of Computer Science and Engineering at the University of Washington. He's a researcher in machine learning known for Markov logic, network enabling, and uncertain inference, which is all out of my pay grade. But what is inside my pay grade in a great book, Pedro wrote this book called The Master Algorithm, How the Quest for the Ultimate Learning Machine Will Remake Our World. Check that out. And then he also wrote 2040, a Silicon Valley satire, which is very funny. So, Pedro, thank you for joining us again. Really appreciate it.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, so I don't know if you saw in the morning, Nvidia stock is like down 16%. And no, we're not trying to turn you to Jim Cramer or something and go into like CNBC and talk about like bye and whatnot. But a lot of this is due to Deepseek, and markets freaking out about what's going on. So maybe love to hear your thoughts on just Deepseek in general, what you thought about it. And then maybe we can go from there, and then Joe can jump in too.
I think the overreaction to Deepseek is ridiculous. It is ridiculous. It's a joke. I'm in disbelief at the sheer extent of the, I don't know how to put it. To me, it's actually been telling just from the reactions that various different kinds of people have had, just how little they understand of AI. I mean, I kind of knew that at some abstract level, but I didn't think it was this bad. Now, I mean, to start with Deepseek itself, right? What I think they've done is they're doing the same kind of thing that everybody's doing, right? They're tweaking LLMs, they're doing this improvement, that improvement, and they're doing a good job. Mm-hmm. They're good people. They are not some bunch of amateurs or garage hobbyists that, half a dozen of them just suddenly produce something amazing on a, shoestring budget. That's not it at all. Their story is actually very interesting, from being a hedge fund and what that has to do with AI, a quant fund and what that has to do with AI and whatnot. But at the end of the day, like they've been working on this for a while, and they've been publishing papers, right? They didn't come out of the blue, right? And the stuff that they've done, again, I haven't looked into it into a lot of detail, so you have to take this with a grain of salt. But they all strike me as fine things to do. None of them, and we can go into them, and none of them strike me as that surprising or I mean. Like the most famous quote in all this, I think, was Mark Andreessen saying like, wow, this is one of the greatest breakthroughs I've ever seen. What is he talking about? Right? It's progress, but it's not a breakthrough that I can see, let alone one of the greatest ever. We can try to think about why he said that. So, and now people, I was thinking like when I saw this, wow, any time now, Nvidia stock is going to go down and a bunch of the other, data center, blah, blah, blah. And guess what, right? But then as happened on the way up, it's gone down by even more than I thought it would, right? You can ask so people seem to be, so my mental model of people's models, like they thought like, oh, this AI thing is going to be super expensive, but it's worth it. So, yeah, wow, Nvidia is going to kill it, right? And now they're like, wow, it's not expensive, it's cheap. Was I think anybody, I mean, you can talk with other AI researchers like, looking at the whole LLM stack of things, there is so much room to make things faster, right? When we
Hmm.
look back, I said that a few years ago. Now I was going to say in 10 years, but now it's not 10. It's maybe now and another 5 is we're going to like, wow, that was such a waste of compute, right? Wow, my God. Like we only need 1,000th of the compute to do that, right? And 1,000, let's say it's 1,000, which I think is, a reasonable number, give or take an order of magnitude. And, and people have been making, I mean, you see these papers coming out, like they cut a factor of 2, they cut a factor of 5, and these guys have done a few of those things and a few other things besides. So nothing surprising. But I think people don't realize just how much improvement there is to be had in just making the algorithms better
Mm.
at both learning and inference time. They're very focused on like, yeah, the hardware, and like we know that, but like most of the speed ups in history come from better algorithm design, which is not to underplay the hardware ones. And with so many people pounding on it, right? Why wouldn't this happen? And then the other thing which I find, I don't know, delicious is like, oh my God, China's catching up with the US in AI. Our massive lead has evaporated. Like, what massive lead? What are you talking about? There was never any moat, right? They were behind in a few ways for a couple of reasons, right? But like there's like China, people, I guess one potentially good side effect of this is people are waking up to the fact, unless the ones that weren't, which they should have been, that China is basically, roughly speaking, neck to neck with the US in AI. They're already ahead in some areas, and they have been for a while. And the
Hmm.
others, you look at the people like, oh, the US is ahead. Well, look at the derivative, right? You know, the US is going like this and China is going like this. So guess what? At some point they cross, right? So there's no surprise there, right? And there's no, as we famously know, there is no moat, right? Is I think the other sort of like myth in all this is like, wow, those open AI guys, these magicians, these geniuses, they have some amazing secret sauce that nobody has. And like, wow, the Chinese are competent. No, they don't, They're a bunch of good people, doing a bunch of things. Again, this is not to downplay their efforts or talent, but it's not, there was no amazing like trade secret that I mean, Sam Altman is very good at selling things, and now this is bad for him. But I think the surprise in this for me has been how surprised people were.
Mm.
Well said. Joe, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, I have a bunch of questions about uh, both how we think about it and also our attempt to understand how the market's thinking about it. I like that you were framing it that way. I guess my high level question is, it seems like a lot of what they've done is straightforward algorithmic improvements that lower the cost of building a new model, and they would also lower the cost of inference when you're running the model. But we're talking about lowering the cost by like 15 or 30 times. And my reaction to that is, I don't think that suddenly puts us into overcapacity.
Indeed. So, very good point. And again, this I think is another thing that people don't necessarily realize, and it's understandable why. But here's the thing: in traditional computing, let's say I don't know databases or computer graphics or whatever, right? If you speed things up by a factor of 30, um, things probably stay cheaper by a factor of 30.
Mm-hmm.
The thing about AI, and this really goes to the core of what these different fields are, is that AI is about solving NP-complete problems. We can always use more capacity. Give me
Mm-hmm.
the whole universe, and it's not enough to play chess, right?
Yeah.
And the thing is, like, talking about inference time compute, people are like, oh, wow, now inference time compute, instead of being instantaneous, takes a while, and it's going to cost more, and this really changes the economics, and blah, blah, blah. This is all true, but hey, if the AI is really good, like I'm more than willing to pay for it and wait for it to think 5 minutes. Are you kidding? The real question, right, is like, does the AI capability go up such that then there is the demand, right? Like, let's put it this
Mm-hmm.
way: it got 30 times cheaper, but the demand is going to get 30 times bigger, right? Again, this is economics. If you think makes cheap, if things get cheaper, the demand goes up. And some things there's only so much demand for. Like we can only eat so much food, right? No matter how gluttonous we are, and so on. But AI, we can consume infinite AI, right? So, in some ways, I understand why people have this reaction. But my view, and again, we'll see how this plays out, is that at the end of the day, if you're a data center builder, right,
Mm-hmm.
I mean, in my mind, I've always been factoring all along that, over the next several years, there's going to be a very large improvement in efficiency. Does that mean that they're overbuilding? No, because the demand will be there, provided the AI improves enough. That to me is the big question.
Right. Yeah, it's strange to have to explain this. I mean, if you're reaching all the way back to, say, the agricultural revolution and saying that improvements in efficiency made it cheaper to grow large amounts of food on the same amount of land and so on and so forth, and that allowed us to, feed more people and have more density in our cities. Great. And that happened, I don't know, 100 years ago. So maybe it's outside of my memory. But it's inside my memory that personal computers became cheaper and cheaper and cheaper by at least, 2 orders of magnitude? And yet the use of them just exploded to the point where now the average American citizen seems to have 3 or 4 equivalent sort of personal computers strapped to them at all times. We got people with watches and phones and smart headgear and laptops, and it's stunning to me how many computers the average citizen seems to have.
I mean, absolutely. And famously, Thomas J. Watson said in the 50s that there was a worldwide demand for 3 computers, right? And Ken Olson, the CEO of Digital, which back then was a big company, and this was like, I guess, the 70s, said, I can't see why people would want a computer in their home.
Yep.
So actually, what would be bad for the field is if the cost stayed high. Right?
Why do you say that?
Like if the cost, I mean, again, look at computers. When what Thomas J. Watson made sense in a world in which a computer was made of, vacuum tubes and cost, whatever, millions of dollars in today's money, right?
Yeah.
And because when it's that expensive, the demand is very low because only really high, net worth, high worth applications are worth that money, right?
Yeah.
So the more the cost of AI goes down, it's like cell phones, right? Imagine if a cell phone, instead of costing, $500, cost 500,000. Would that be better? So so like if you look at this from Nvidia's point of view, right? I think in the short term, well, yes, we're seeing a dip because people are adjusting at least their short-term expectations. We could talk about that. But in the long run, I can make arguments about they're overvalued and undervalued, but I think what has happened with Deepseek does not make a big, difference in that. And maybe, right, at the end of the day, it's actually a difference for the better. Although in my mind, this kind of honestly, if you just gave me, this is always a good thought experiment to do. If you took the DeepSeek paper, right, and just gave it to me, right, I just found it, whatever, on archive, I'd be like, cool, yeah, progress continuing as expected.
Yep.
Right? Again, like I can point to 2 other papers doing the same kinds of things, like doing projections into lower dimensions of the key value store and whatnot. There's it's obviously a very a sensible and effective thing to do, right? But why is there one a shock to the world and the other one's not?
It's funny because the reaction to the improved efficiency and the lower cost is to me so extreme that it's overshadowing the other parts of their papers that are actually more interesting theoretically. It's like we've all been totally distracted by the economics.
Absolutely. I mean, again, it depends on who you're talking to. I think among AI researchers and engineers, the economics is not necessarily the thing that they're most focused on, and their system does do some things that are potentially interesting. So for example, let's start with the banal one, right? They again, this is not new. As far as I can tell, they mostly combine things that they didn't invent, and they tweak them. This is all fine, right? But like they do this thing of like they don't just predict the next token; they predict the 2 tokens after that as well, right?
Right.
This is not a revolution, but it's actually if somebody said like I'm going to try them, you're like that sounds like a good idea, right?
Yeah. And then there's a good paper from Meta on this, and there's the early work that OpenAI did on their Turbo series.
And honestly, very incremental in my mind, barely worth publishing a paper about. But hey, that's the way. These days people publish ever more papers with ever smaller increments, right? Like the calculus approximation is getting better and better.
Publish or perish.
But at least among research, I think the thing that people are most intrigued by is their use of reinforcement learning.
Yes.
Right. Which, and again, now I'm going to speculate because I don't know, and maybe they don't know either. But the claim is that the variation of reinforcement learning that they're doing learns to reason by itself. Which, if it was true, would be, a big deal, right? Learning to reason by yourself. But again, there's a few caveats in order here. One of them is that I unfortunately these days I'm very suspicious of any big claims for reinforcement learning because they've been wrong every time for the last 50 years, right? And RLHF is another one. It's like every time I remember when RLHF came out and said, like, I bet you can do this with supervised learning. Because these days, I mean, like what I usually tell people about reinforcement learning is like this. I mean, like we all love reinforcement learning, right? Like it makes a lot of intuitive sense. Animals seem to do it. AI should involve reinforcement learning. But then in practice, what happens is the following. Reinforcement learning is learning from delayed rewards. Like you do a chain of reasoning and then you get the right answer or you don't, right? And then you propagate, those delayed rewards back to each decision point, right? This is how reinforcement learning is supposed to work. Beautiful story. But what happens in practice is, and the rewards are sparse. Like, in Go, you play a whole game and you get one bit of information at the end, right?
Yep.
So what tends to happen is if the rewards are fairly dense and not very delayed, you can just use supervised learning. You don't need, forget reinforcement learning. It's a waste of time, right? If the rewards, on the other hand, really are sparse and delayed, reinforcement learning doesn't work. So either way, it winds up not happening. And then, of course, what happened with DPL was that, like, this group of Stanford came out with this great paper saying, like, yeah, I mean, I remember reading the lecture saying, like, they're calling this reinforcement learning, but they're just supervising, this is just supervised learning from people's feedback. Yes, this answer is better than this one, right? So at this point, I'm very skeptical of these claims for the amazing things that reinforcement learning can do for reasoning. Although, I think, in the big picture, hopefully at the end of the day, it will, right? But the things that they say, and again, I haven't looked at this into detail, so take that with a grain of salt, that the Deepseek folks says like, oh, look, right? It is doing now this reasoning pattern that it wasn't before. Isn't that amazing? Like, this is just like, a deep mind saying like, well, look, it has learned to play. What is that game with the wall where it learns to break up the wall, right?
Oh, breakout.
It learns to play breakout. It's like, well, look, you did this very large search. This thing happens where finally the thing starts, bouncing around and destroying the wall. Like there was no breakthrough here, right? And then, I mean, sorry, I mean, I understand. I get excited when I get results like that too. And then someone did this beautiful experiment where they changed the location of the wall by 1 pixel, and the the performance went down
Suddenly
to
the
random.
strategy doesn't work anymore.
So at this point, my priority is that there is no great, reinforcement learning for reasoning breakthrough going on there. But who knows? There might be, or this might be the path to one, right? But there's nothing at this point that justifies people going hog wild. And again, that doesn't seem to be the main thing that they're going hog wild over. Although, from my point of view, in terms of novelty and potential larger term implications, that's actually the most interesting one.
I'm curious to get your thoughts on the reinforcement learning part. I mean, I've been following all this back and forth with process reward models versus outcome reward models, and it seems like in the Deepseek case, they just do this. They call it a group process outcome or something like that, some longer name, but they're essentially only doing what to me looks like an outcome reward. They're only giving credit for the final answer, and there's no intermediate checkpoints where they try to give like a process reward model would come in with extra, credit.
My impression, which again could be wrong, is actually a little bit different from that, is that you can do these two things, right? And by the way, as with a lot of other things, this is a very old idea, right? People, like you see these, like, for example, The Economist started like their they have a piece about like how this is going to change everything, right? And The Economist is smarter than most. I say like the first ever reasoning model, blah blah blah. What are you talking about? Like people have been doing reasoning models by the hundreds for decades, right? And there's always this thing like,
hey, 50% of people who watch this video don't subscribe. Don't be that person. Hit the subscribe button. If you've already subscribed, thank you. You're the best. If you can, think of someone who would benefit from this video and share with them the link, either on social media, at work, or wherever. Thanks.
Reasoning, right, is a tree of things, or direct to the cyclic graph if you want to be more precise. Like you have your evidence, you have your conclusions, or I think of proving a theorem, right? Like you use this axiom, combine it with that one, right? And now it has been known for a long time, and it's just natural. I mean, it's obvious that like if you just train on the result, it's a hard problem.
Yep.
Right? Because there's this exponential number of paths, and how do you find one?
Damn right. And you might get to the right answer, but through the wrong path.
Yeah, no, exactly. In machine learning, again, that will That's the problem, right?
Yeah.
Absolutely correct. But another thing that you can do to various degrees, like you can introduce supervision at the intermediate steps, right?
Right. That's why I was asking you about these process reward model
Exactly.
ideas.
So, but you can do that in a whole host of ways,
Yep.
most of which greatly predate deep learning. And even in deep learning land, the whole chain of thought, blah, 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 is really doing that, right? In one form or another. It's like give the thing in one way or another more supervision about what steps to take. And if I understand correctly, what the Deepseek folks have done is like they are doing a combination of the two. But what they're trying to do, which is, I think, very smart, right, is if it works, but again, it's hard to tell at this point, but it's a good idea, right, but again, it's not a new idea. It's a new version of an old idea, but fine, is to say what we're going to do is going to have an objective function for the result, as we always do, but we're also going to have an objective function for the quality of your reasoning. Right? Is instead of just saying like I'm gonna checkpoint you here and here and here, I'm not like and then now of course there's various heuristics you can use to do this, as always in AI, and there's probably many more to be discovered. And I don't know exactly how good theirs is, but like it's like think about it this way: what makes good versus bad reasoning, right? And if you look at a piece of reasoning, can you tell? If you can do that, now you can use this as part of the supervision. And the nice thing about this is that now you actually need less of the traditional supervision, which is, of course, the problem with supervising at individual steps is that it's a lot more expensive, that is rarer, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And now potentially you bypass that. Now, having seen what they claim and what they have, I'm kind of not quite squaring like how something so good happened from so little. But maybe it did, right? So I think the jury's out on that. And, the good thing about, breakthroughs like this, right, is now the research community is interested, to their credit, it's all open source. People are going to pound on this, come back in 6 months or a year, and people will have figured out what is really working, what did they kid themselves with. I mean, what happened with AlexNet is, maybe a good, maybe not a good example. Is like when that came out, the results were spectacular, right? It was a breakthrough moment. Yep. And the reaction of the folks in the vision community was like, they got something wrong. Right? It's like, we don't believe this. Right?
Yes.
But then they went and repeated it and tested it and improved it and applied to other things. It was like, wow, it still works, right? So yeah, right. So maybe that'll happen here. But
the next time they had a conference, instead of one deep learning model, the whole conference was deep learning models.
Oh yeah, like I have a colleague, Ali Farhadi, a vision guy, who's now the CEO of the Allen AI Institute. And he said at one point, he was talking with a new student about possible research projects and described one, and the student said, but there's no deep learning in this. Is it vision? So that's where we are today.
That's a rapid transition.
Oh yeah. It's a phase.
I like your point about this being open and I guess MIT licensed, and all the weights are there, the model is there, the training process is there. So it should be very rapid for people to check their work and see that it actually does what they think it does.
I think a lot of the enthusiasm about it comes from it being open source. And I think people like Mark Andreessen and Jan LeCun, right, they've been, very vocal in their support of it. I think partly because it's open source and they want to promote that, which, I'm all fine with. But if I had to guess why Mark Andreessen made such a hyperbolic statement about it, I think partly it's because he wants to promote the open source side of things, right? And generally got excited about it because it's open source. Maybe also because, he's very smart. He's one of the smartest people in the Valley. So great respect for him. But he's not an AI expert, so he's a VC, right? So maybe he doesn't fully, he just sees things from more the outside and seeing, for example, what the implications could be in terms of open source. Those implications, I think, will be very healthy, right? And I think, it is true that one of the things that made AI progress so fast was there's this large and very open research community where the data sets are shared, the benchmarks, the code, everything. This is incredibly powerful, right? Yes. In some ways, it's more powerful than any given piece of research. In fact, there's a community that works like this, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Jordan and I complain all the time when we look at some medical research and it's in some closed journal and you can't even download the paper or read it, right?
Exactly, yeah.
Whereas this community, like everything is all, unless it's an OpenAI model.
No, but exactly. So I was going to say, unfortunately, the problem in the last several years is that this has changed quite dramatically. it's not just OpenAI, it's OpenAI and Google and even Meta in part and like. And I understand their commercial considerations, but this whole openness has started turning into a bunch, again, comparing with the world of quant funds, which again, it's very interesting that these guys, are or were formerly a quant fund, right?
No, they still are.
No, they are, but like, I mean, if you know their story, right? They were very successful, but then the Chinese government clamped down on it, and they're like, we got to move, we got to pivot to something else, right? And so
and now they have a couple thousand GPUs in a cluster, like free.
No, so they have, right? So let's look at that for a second. Like they have 10,000 GPUs, which they acquired before all these restrictions came in. So they had the GPUs they needed, for a different reason, right? Just like Mark Zuckerberg had GPUs for doing VR, right? So,
right. That's where you opened with saying that
right?
our crazy restrictions weren't really that effective anyway.
No, I mean, I would actually say the restrictions are counterproductive.
Yes.
The restrictions encourage China to develop things. I mean, again, like there's this notion that like, oh, you can't do AI without the latest, greatest GPUs. Like, what are you talking about, right? The latest greatest GPUs gives you a factor of something. Let's call it 10, right, over the previous generation. But like, so what, right? I can do things. I can worry about that, or I can say like, let me make my algorithms 10 times faster, and then I'm winning because I'm also spending less money on GPUs. Like, come on, right? Like, there's no magic there, right?
Your point is that constraint is actually inspiring them to improve their algorithms.
Exactly. So you're doing China a favor. What I would do if I was the US is like flood them with expensive GPUs. Let the Chinese, command machine say like, we are going to invest $1 trillion, dollars in GPUs, which will be obsolete 10 years from now. Unfortunately,
this is your killing them with kindness strategy.
Yeah. No, but okay. But so to go back to Deepseek, so they had the GPUs, right? Yep. They also had exactly the right. By the way, I formerly, ran a machine learning lab at a quant fund, right?
Oh,
and the similarities between these things have always been striking to me, right? With a couple of important differences. The main one of which is the openness, right? Tech, and machine learning in particular, used to be very open, and quant funds are the maximum closed, like super closed, like because again, the algorithms. There's valid reasons for that, right?
But you got competition and regulatory requirements.
Leaving the regulatory requirements aside for just a second, if you're a successful quant fund, you make billions of dollars on nothing but your algorithms.
Yep.
And the algorithms, the models, whatever you want to call them, they are protected by nothing but secrecy.
Yep.
Because if you patented them, they would become immediately useless. It's not that people wouldn't be able to copy them, although, again, software patents are pretty unenforceable, is that once I know what your algorithms, I can trade against it and you lose money and I make money.
Right.
So they are absolutely, I mean, even internally, right, this compartmentalization, like person A or group A doesn't know what group B is doing, et cetera, right? And the problem with that, which is the main one here, is that like it really slows down progress. Right? Because everybody has to keep reinventing everything. Whereas in an open community, you make very fast progress, right? And now, so Deepseek accidentally, there's a very big element here, which is like, they have a couple hundred really good quantitative people with degrees from the top universities in China. They work a lot like these labs do, right? Like, OpenAI hires people from Stanford and Berkeley, and they hire people from Tsinghua and Peking and whatnot, right? And these people have the same skills that you, and they probably, like all these quant funds have been playing with LLMs to generate more predictors and whatnot. So they were like there was nothing out of left field in
I see. Essentially trained in the same ways, using the same techniques, applying the same systems to build proprietary trading algorithms, now shifting their attention to doing deep learning.
Exactly, in the same methodology. Again, like what these people at the renaissances of the world have been doing is it's this machine learning methodology. You have to do all this holdout testing very carefully and blah blah. It's just machine learning by another name. And in an even better twist, so like the most successful one of the time is Renaissance, right? Renaissance wasn't doing that well until they hired a bunch of people from IBM's language and speech group. I don't know if you know this story. Yeah. And then they did something that was the biggest success in the history of investing.
Yeah, they're annualizing 17-18% per year. Yeah. It's ridiculous.
This was a bunch of speech people and language and machine translation. So Renaissance went from language to the market, and these guys just did the opposite thing.
Pedro, so I got to ask you, you heard about the OpenAI people who are complaining about like the NDAs and whatnot, but you must have been rolling your eyes because if you're in Quant, the type of NDAs you're signing there are just like you will die if you mention anything you're doing.
Oh my God! You have. So I usually joke to people that like part of my deal with these shows, the company that I work for is like there's a ninja that follows me everywhere. And if I open my mouth, the ninja shoots an arrow and I'm dead. And the pages and pages of fine print specifying all the things I can't talk about are unbelievable. And then, as you mentioned, there's the regulatory part, which is like the amount of regulation around this is just, I mean, people in tech have no idea, how good they have it comparatively.
Right. Two other unrelated points. One, I used to work M&A at Google, and some of the deals I worked on, we would specifically make carve-outs for the AI researchers that they could still publicize their research. It's like very important for them. Mm-hmm. And then what you and Joe are mentioning is that now that we've found gold and people are making money, it's like, no, we're walking away from that in certain regards.
Well, there's two sides to this, right? There's a push and pull. There's a reason that Google started doing that, which is to their benefit. Because at the end of the day, the scarcest, most precious resource in all this is not compute, it's not data, it's the talent. The talent is the real bottleneck. The quant funds also understand this, at least the best ones, is like, you gotta hire the best people, you're not going anywhere. And what do the best people want? They want freedom to do the research that crosses their mind, and they want to be able to publish it. Mm-hmm. And then, if you're the Google, you go like, well, okay, maybe in some ways that's not ideal, but on balance, it's worth doing to get those people. And I mean, I remember, I'll give you an example. I remember, many years ago, a student of mine, we did a paper on an improvement to PageRank. This was, I don't know, a long time ago now. And I remember, a guy from Google at the end of a conference or of our talk or something saying like, yeah, we tried out all your stuff. And okay, tell me how that went. Well, I can tell you this level, but beyond that, sorry, I can't. And vice versa, their papers, actually, this is an even better one. Is like, I remember like one Google paper that was saying like, okay, but tell me in detail how this works. And it's like, oh, that I can't tell you. So the whole notion of reproducibility is actually protected by how obscure and complicated these algorithms are. So they know that they can publish something. And then there's another aspect, which these days in AI is extremely important. And again, Deepseek is obviously onto this, is that like the publicity value is enormous, right? You got to make this. I mean, look at how much they have gained by making it public. It's free publicity.
Yep.
But in the meantime, you actually do have a bunch of other stuff that is needed. This is not physics, right? You don't say like, oh, F equals ma, and now it just works, right? There's 100 times other stuff that you have to get right before it works. And their view is that, which I think is correct, is like, people will eventually get that, but we have a 2-3 year lead, which is enough, to give us first mover advantage and network effects and blah, blah, blah. So there you go. Which is what OpenAI has been benefiting from. No more, no less.
Going back to what you were describing earlier, is the Deepseek organization transitioning completely to this machine learning field? Are they getting out of the quant side, or are they just bridging both?
I don't know, but sort of like trying to play this out in their heads, right? The reason they decided to diversify or pivot into machine learning was that the quant fund part wasn't really cutting it for them anymore. Yeah, I think it depends on. I mean, honestly, let me put it this way. More generally, right? If you're a company like Deepseek or one of these quant funds, right, and you have those GPUs, you have those people, and you go like, how should I use this? Shall I use this to model the markets, or shall I use this to do AI, right? And my answer would be like, go do AI. The rewards there are so much bigger, right? It's like in the markets, there's this notion of capacity limitation, right? It's like, if you keep winning, there's a reason. The reason you can't beat the market is that if you keep winning, you become the market.
Right.
So there is a hard ceiling on what you can do in terms of even just making money or having impact as a quant fund. Whereas in AI, it's like no quant fund is ever going to make $1 trillion. The AI company could make $1 trillion and probably will.
So many points I want to go after. That was fantastic. I told Joe sometimes when he says great things, he's a Russian doll of awesomeness. The more I learn, keeps on going. You have the same effect here, Pedro. On YouTube, there's so many junk videos of like, I'm using ChatGPT to do trades, and this is how much money I'm making. And I'm thinking to myself, wait a minute, if everyone's using the same models, then you basically are not trading on anything like novel, and you're using the same strategy, so you're competing away the profit and whatnot. Maybe you can dive more into that. And then the second, your idea of you becoming the market and you start moving the market's an issue, which is what Warren Buffett talks about all the time. About, I have so much money, I just can't deploy it all.
Well, so to take the first one, there is this notion in finance world, not just quant, of some people call it noise traders and others call it the dumb money. And the dumb money is how the smart money makes money, right? You need the beauty, the perverse beauty, in fact, it's the ugliness of the market. And by the way, in China, this is in the US at this point, most of the market is professional players working on behalf of pension funds and banks and blah, blah, blah. So we benefit. But it's people who, as much as possible, or to first approximation of what they're doing. In China, it's a bunch of amateurs. But you look at the stonk craze and blah, 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 the meme stocks, that is the amateurs, right? And the thing about the amateurs that's amazing is that they lose money, but they keep coming back. This is amazing, right? I mean, I've heard people say, and this was a long time ago, that well, if those people didn't keep losing money, where would we make money? Right? And I mean, to me, this is tragic, right? But the way to do is you got to educate these people and inform them that, I mean, but the temptation is irresistible. And also, when someone, let's say, you make a lot of money in the stock market, you publicize it to everybody. Oh, yeah, look, I'm the king, and I lose a lot of money. I keep quiet about it because it's embarrassing. Right. So there's a huge sampling bias. So everyone's always thinking about wow, I can make all this money, and not thinking about, and then eventually they lose, right? So there's this problem, right? And what you're gonna have to do is and again, the analogy is do you think you can beat whatever Nadal at tennis? Well, of course not. Even if you're a good tennis player, what makes you think you can beat Renaissance? I mean, what? Right? So my advice to people about investment and all is you should just do people regular people. What do I do? I say is do the most boring thing you can. Read Burton Malkiel, Random Walk Down Wall Street, right? It's just follow that, right? You spend $15 on that book, and it's gonna
right. Random Walk Down Wall Street, Fooled by Randomness. Maybe Stocks by Long Run. There's the three things you need to read, and you're pretty much good for for investing.
Now, some people here might be thinking, wait, quant funds are all about the market being inefficient, and random walk is about it being efficient. So, aren't I talking out of both sides of my mouth? No, the thing is that if the market is so noisy that if you're a finance professor with a couple of grad students, to the extent that you can analyze it, it appears efficient. The inefficiencies, that are there and are real are very hard to get at. And these quant funds are not wasting money on expensive people. They have them because they need it, right? So but though it's super noisy, non-stationary. It's a nightmare problem for machine learning, right?
Yeah.
But out of that, if you can, for example, if someone tells me I can predict, stock movements with 60% accuracy, I say you're smoking something. If someone says to me, I can 60%, right, which in most fields is terrible. If someone says to me, I can predict stock movements with 50.5% accuracy, I'm tell me more about it. Because they're more likely to be telling the truth and that 0.5 leveraged and compounded and average like that, I'm going to make a killing with that, right? But again, then you get into this notion, which was the second part of the question, of capacity limitation, which is let's suppose that you are the best player in the market, right? You make, and this is exponential. This is the thing is Einstein famous said, there's no more powerful in the universe than compound interest, right? It's you compounding at a greater rate than I am, right? I'm whatever, AQR, I get 5%, and your Renaissance, you get 20, right? You're going to become the whole market in no time. Why don't you, right? Well, actually, it's for a couple of reasons, but the simplest one is that if you compound that 20%, I compound that 5, after 10 years, you are 99.9 something percent of the market, right? So you can never make more. Let me put it this way. The market is not a zero-sum game, but it grows at the rate that the economy grows, right? You can't get more returns from the market in the long run on average than if the economy is growing at 5%, the market can't improve at more than 5%, right? Minor things aside, right?
And those big players have
it's a zero-sum game.
Yeah, the big players have to find another market to play in. And even for them, when they have an edge, it usually erodes over time because other players start to trade against them. and the edge slowly goes away, and then they have to find another edge, another algorithm.
Exactly. Yeah.
But I just thank you for breaking this all down. I love the idea of, okay, we're the Deepseek team. We're doing all this trading. Let me get my, and I say this lightly, fungible machine learning researchers. Now I want to apply you to AI, and let's go crush it in that direction. Like, I just love how they're able to just move through fields
In
like
fact,
that. And, yeah,
even they were already doing AI, just applied to different domains. But
Mm-hmm.
many of the similar, I mean, like, what is the most, I mean, like this, again, language is sequential prediction, and so is the
Right,
stock market.
Right. They weren't trying to predict the next token. They were trying to do time series predictions on price movements.
Yeah, and there are some differences, but clearly a lot of the skills and knowledge that you have, the toolkit, are the same. So it doesn't surprise me at all that this would happen. In fact, I bet that a bunch of these quant funds are going like, shall we do the same?
exactly. So,
and also, you touched on this idea.
There, right?
You touched on the idea of them adopting this more open strategy, publishing things under an MIT license as a way to promote their work and to reward their top researchers. And is that their strategy to attract even more researchers? Are they trying to build up their team, or what do you think they're up to?
No, I mean, so in the U.S. context, and that is an important consideration. I think you are always trying to attract more top people, also because you're always losing them. Again, ask OpenAI, right? But there's another, which I would say in Deepseek's case is probably the bigger consideration, is like, this is the freemium model, right? Which also applies to a lot of other software, right? You got to give something away to people for free, just so that everybody knows about it. And then there's another tier where people pay. And the people who pay are like, a small percentage of the total, but you make so much money from them, again, because the rest is, the marginal cost is very low, right? That it actually all works out. So they're just following that playbook, which to me is a smart thing to do. So they are not, like the Googles and Amazons and Microsofts, they're also cloud providers that want to sell you cloud cycles. Which Meta isn't, which explains a lot of their difference. Like, Meta doesn't have anything to sell you in that regard, right? And then, Zach will say this, right? So in a way, the Googles and Amazons, they don't mind if you spend a lot of, money on compute, but Deepseek is not in, like, that's not a consideration for them. So I think they're just doing the freemium model. And again, like in some companies, I found this over time, and I thought it was kind of puzzling, but then funny. It's like, they're funding for, like, they give me a grant, right? External researcher. And this is what part of their budget does it go into? It's the PR part.
yeah.
And I'm like, okay, I'm your PR. Well, okay, thanks for the money anyway. But it's true. It is a form of PR.
I see.
Yeah. Oh, okay. So, kind of a lot of different directions we can go into, but quickly, I'm going to go back to Nvidia's evaluation here, and right now you're showing the stock is down by 17% today, but I think this also ties nicely into what you're saying about certain trades becoming crowded and a lot of hot money going to certain areas. So let me do a Rux proc. Let me get my political science BS degree understanding of what you said, and then let me see if this makes sense, and you can tell me if it's true or not. You're thinking the news on Deepseek's been oversold. They're going through the path of progress of making these models more efficient. This is not the end of NVIDIA. It just means that there's good thing for NVIDIA because people want more intelligence, they want more algorithms. So in the end, right now, Wallstreet's overselling this news, and maybe these are people who are quants or people who've made leveraged momentum trades are exiting those positions right now because of this news, and it's oversold. That was word salad, but let me know what you think.
Well, I like your mention of a political science BS degree. I wonder if it works in both senses of BS.
Yes. I was like, what allows me to avoid calculus and just watch CNN and whatever? Okay, political science, there we go.
A good political science degree is anything but BS. But anyway, I think, so Nvidia stock, right, at this point is your quintessential very high return, very high risk stock. So I could make you, I think, a reasonable case why Nvidia is going to be worth even more. They're worth whatever, 3 trillion. They're going to be worth 6. I can make you a case that Nvidia is going to go down back to 300 billion. Both of those things can, most companies, their standard deviation is fairly narrow, right? Nvidia isn't, right? And now here's what I think is that, and again, by the way, there's an interesting detail in this, which is like, the big fall, the big sharp fall in the stock happened now, but the news is a few days old.
Mm-hmm.
Which means that you could have made a ton of money just by short selling it. I mean, really, that thought occurred to me a few years ago.
Why didn't you message me on Gmail? I would have. We got the money together, man. We'd be right now in Barbados
that
hanging
seemed
out.
obvious to me. Like again, like is it not obvious? I mean,
Yeah.
I couldn't have told you that like it's going to go down by 16%, and I was like,
Right.
well, it's more like how much it's going to go down by, and like what should the short sell cutoff be?
We saw this during COVID. I had a friend who worked at a hedge fund, and
Yeah.
when COVID started coming in news from China, he was like short everything in the market like now, and I'm like, what?
Yeah.
He's like, just people are going to overreact and you're going to make money. I'm like, no, efficient market hypothesis.
But who
yeah.
makes the market efficient, right? It's like the whole thing is like, oh, there aren't dollar bills on the street because somebody picked them up. Well, who picked them up?
Right.
Somebody has to pick them up, right? So somebody has to make the market efficient. But then, of course, the race goes to the swift, and the amateur is not the swift or the one. I mean, there's a whole set of considerations there. But here's the thing: you could argue that Nvidia stock was overpriced anyway.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, like in a way, the operative question, if you're playing the market, is like, is Nvidia stock now undervalued over? Is it a buy, sell, or hold? Right? Like, what is it? Right? And you could make an argument that, like, well, maybe this was an overreaction, but it was overhyped anyway. So good, it's closer to its true value now, right? You could also, I mean, you could also say like, well, it went down, and now as people absorb what's really going on, and it's not spectacular, it's going to go up again, right? Because everybody's trying to crowd into the trade, the market overreacts, which is why it's so bumpy, right? It's like people are like, there's going to be this big fall, and now it's going to creep up again over the next month.
Right.
That is a complete, I would give that scenario like whatever, a 50% probability of happening.
Joe and I saw this at Google all the time. It was like, Google usually gets 20% year-on-year revenue growth. It got 19.5%, and Wall Street just sells off like it's over. And then over time, everyone digests. It goes back up again.
Yeah, or like more recently when they've made these mistakes, like with with the Gemini whole African Nazi thing, or like that mistake that they made in the demo. Like they made this mistake in the demo, like of their assistant, and it was like, boom, oh my God, they're losing the AI race. Like, Google is doomed, right?
The best was when Bard came out and the stock went down. Can you imagine being the product manager on Bard and be like, cost the stock to go down billion.
All of this? What did I work my head off for?
Exactly. So, okay, well said on that. I want to bring in some comments from people who are tuning in right now. We got Maj saying Pedro coming out swinging, and I couldn't agree more. And then he says the full R1 model needs 16 A100s to run at a decent rate for one person. That's around $128,000 worth of NVIDIA GPUs. And that just says nothing about Jurgen's paradox. And literally the history of computer science, brute force solution that works and optimizes from there. And when you were talking about efficiency, Pedro, it got me thinking about the history of steam power, because I don't know why I just try to connect everything to steam power. And I asked ChatGPT, can we talk about the efficiency of steam engines since they came out? And it went old school and talked about Hero's Aerofoil back in first CE and its efficiency, thermal efficiency 0%. And the Savory pump in 1698 was 1%. Newcomen engine 1712, 1%. Watt steam engine 2%. And then eventually we get down to steam turbines, the present 40 to 50%. But that all that progress took about, you could say 2 million from Aerofoil, but you could say from 1600s to now about 400 years for us to get that efficiency going. But it took time, but we eventually got there. And the point you're making, I was thinking these LLMs are like in the first inning right now. We're just excited they work. And a lot of these companies are thinking, okay, how can we constantly juice up more efficiency? So I thought that point you're making was really solid.
I mean, if you do the analogy with the steam engine, right, we are not in Aristotle's time with LLMs. I mean, again, people also tend to underplay that because I guess it's less visible, less easy to understand. But the LLMs are a whole stack of very hard-won advances. Mm-hmm. The transformer, Atom, layer norm. I mean, even backprop, even neural networks, like they're the GPUs themselves, right? Like we're already at if you think I was looking at that data and thinking, well, yeah, but the difference between that is that what happened is that your efficiency went from 0 to 50%, right? Whereas in AI, we are writing an exponential, which will eventually asymptote, but the advance is not in this percent, that much percent, is in orders of magnitude, right?
Yeah.
And our efficiency in AI has already gone, by orders of magnitude on the hardware and software side, without which we wouldn't have the LLM. So in a way, we're in the middle of that curve, right? Mm-hmm. We already have steam engines. I mean, and again, this is what, people often have a hard time getting their head around exponentials. the stuff that we have is exponentially better than what we had 10 years ago, but it's exponentially worse than what we're going to have 10 years from now. Right? And the thing, what that comment said is very common. So like, oh, it's all about brute force. In computer science, brute force means you just try every last solution. Like imagine playing chess by brute force. Like you wouldn't get anywhere. But then what happens? People say like, oh, Deep Blue beat Kasparov by brute force. There was no learning there. And this is a huge insult to the people who spent 30 years developing game search techniques and parallelizing that and blah, blah, blah. Really, outstanding research and engineering. So they're like the brute, at any point we call brute. But so going to LLMs today, on top of all of that we've come up with, there is a large element of brute force, which is still brute force. And 10 years from now, go like, oh, wow, that was ridiculous, right? Now that's the advances that, like the ones that Deepseek might have been compiled in. And now they're still brute force, but the same brute force is 1,000,000 times more efficient than it was decades ago.
Well said. Well said. Yeah. No, I didn't think about it that way. So, Pedro, Joe, we get 10 minutes left. What are things that you want to talk about? Doesn't have to be Deepseek related, but any other thoughts, Pedro, maybe about this, or we could talk about Stargate or anything else in AI that you have you have a beef with that you want to talk about right now. You want to get off your chest here at Sick Podcast.
I mean, your choice, right? There's so many things we can talk about in 10 minutes. There are the things that I'm excited about, right? Not that I have a beef with. But, before we get to those, I mean, Stargate is another...
what's your reaction
I'm
to the
already
Stargate
laughing,
thing?
which tells you what I think of it. But yeah, so you tell me, you want to talk for a few minutes about Stargate?
Yeah, go for it. If you're laughing, I want to laugh too. Come on, let's go.
I mean, one of the most ironic things about Stargate is that came on the back of Deepseek.
Yes.
Which for Sam Altman was the worst possible thing that could have happened, right? And now I was just talking with a journalist on Friday about this. He was like trying to understand like what the hell is the Stargate thing, like and I said, well, maybe the best way to do this is to break it down by the different players, right? What does Donald Trump? So the Trump administration. This was an announcement at the White House, right? As far as I can tell, the White House and Trump have nothing to do with this. What is the point of the federal government is to make it easy? I mean, it's whatever. It's mostly at the state. I mean, like it was so for Trump. This was a fabulous PR opportunity, saying like we're behind the AI, like so, like the like that part, absolutely right. Now the other players like Larry Ellison and Maza and MGX. By the way, apropos the stock market, like MGS is this I think UAE big fund.
It's a sovereign wealth, right?
Yeah, sovereign wealth fund, and what they have in common with Maza is that they have a lot of money and they're desperate to get into the AI game. Right, which if you're Sam Altman is like you're gonna salivate at them, right? But one quick hilarious parenthesis: there's a company called MGX in America that produces marble flooring. Stock has skyrocketed.
Don't tell me the stock. Oh God, that happens all the time. Or you have a stock that's one ticker symbol different than the main stock in the popular.
This is how well informed the market is.
Yes.
This is how efficient it is. But so these guys want to get in on the game. And like the single most remarkable thing about Stargate for me is this, not the most important, but the most remarkable is like, if I understand it correctly, which maybe I don't, and we don't have all the details, OpenAI is putting in $19 billion that they don't have because the money they have, they need it, right? That's why they have it, right?
Yep.
$19 billion of allegedly, supposedly 500 billion, and they're going to own 40% of the company or the project and have operational control over it. They're also not so like they contribute a very small fraction of the money. They don't build or operate the data centers, and they're the owners.
It's a sweet deal. That is a sweet deal for them.
It's like a mind-boggling sweet deal.
Yeah. And for people who aren't watching, Stargate's basically a gigantic data center they want to build in Texas, right? So then they can run their models and train their models. Is that what the? No,
I mean, so Stargate, is commendably ambitious. They want to build a whole world-spanning network of data centers.
Oh, okay.
Oh no, like so you have to like in these things. It's very important to distinguish, like what is from what they're talking about. Right now, they're building a data center in Abilene, which is really they're really just building the building. and being delayed by permitting and blah blah blah. Right? Elon Musk, built one in 2 months because he said to hell with the permitting. And then Microsoft and Amazon are like, we can't do that. Which, that there's a whole story there, right? But like they want to build a whole network of data centers, and this is just the first step, right? And again, this is all part, and this is where it connects with Deepseek. We're like, we need more power, right? And and they've gotten to this thing, which hopefully maybe now we land of saying like, Sam Altman said like, we're going to need, what was it, $7 trillion, and then it's like, oh, this is just 500 billion. That's nothing compared to 7 trillion, right?
The Overton windows moved.
But that is the goal, right? If you're Sam Altman, you come out, you can also do this in politics. You say like, we are going to regulate everything to death. And then actually, no, it's only these few things that we're going to regulate. Sigh of relief.
Yes.
Right.
Comparatively, like, it's a deal. Only 500 billion.
Like that. They're like, I think people on both sides know how to do this, and Sam Altman is very good at this, right? But that's I think that's a large part of what's going on. But this thing of like, I don't know if you've ever seen, Dario Amore.
Yeah.
Another great, he has this gesture where he says like, oh, like it costs $1 billion now, but it's going to cost 10, and then it's going to cost 100. And he has this line that goes with waves his hand, and it's going up exponentially, becoming progressively wavier.
Yeah. Speaking of him, have you noticed, like a year ago, it was all he would talk about is doom and gloom for AI, and then 5 or 6 months ago, he got the religion and said, "No, actually, AI is pretty cool, and I like it, and I'm very positive on that."
Yeah, we don't hear about that
switch
part anymore.
Yeah,
I mean, I think it's funny you should say that. I maybe have a low pass filter, and I've averaged out some of that. I think people in AI, and like we're all prone to that. When things are going well, we get very excited, overexcited. Right, like, oh, we're almost there. AGI is coming. I found it, right? And then when things don't go well, then it's a manic depressive cycle, right?
Yep.
And the folks at Anthropic are as prone to that as anybody else. But Dario, in general, ever since I've known him, has always been this, like Elisut Skever, who interestingly has changed his tune recently, which is very interesting. Actually, not even that recently, but anyway, it's an interesting comparison. Because they are both researchers, unlike Sam Altman, who's basically, a VC entrepreneur, etc. But they were always like scale, right? They got on this scale bandwagon. They hilariously think they invented scaling machine learning. It's like, but anyway, and Dario's still doing that, right? And now, of course, at this point, it's a combination of what, and then they put on these little hedges so that they're not completely discredited if it doesn't come out to be true. But like at this point, people like Dario and Sam, they also have a very important business reason to do this hyping, is that they need to raise the money, and therefore, without the hype, there is no money. So if you're in a difficult, like if you're Dario or Sam, you are like riding a rocket, hoping it goes to the moon and doesn't explode. But actually, the chances are it will explode before it gets to the moon. And what can you do? All you can do is ride it and do the best you can.
Right. And to your point, this DeepSeek announcement, I mean, the timing was just, if it would have just happened a few days earlier, the ability to get that Stargate project done would have been much harder.
Well, there are some conspiracy theorists, who say this was a deliberate ploy by the CCCP to discredit.
Oh, that's right. That's right. It's a psyop by the Chinese government.
It's like, why wouldn't they do that? No, we want the U.S. to waste that money.
Well, it's nice also because OpenAI is constantly destroying Google's marketing thunder. Anytime Google has a good announcement, OpenAI comes out the same day. And now it's nice to see that happen to OpenAI with this whole DeepSeek thing.
Oh, absolutely. So this is clearly, I mean, the first time I saw this, I was like, I wonder if this is on purpose. It's completely on purpose. Like, I think this comes straight from Sam himself. Is like, every time Google does nothing, we have to undermine them. And, to be fair, he's the little guy and Google's the big guy. So when you're a little guy, you're allowed to be a little bit more ruthless. But yeah, in a one way, like the one sentence summary of this is like DeepSeek just did to OpenAI what OpenAI did to Google. It's like, wow, things are speeding up, right? The speed at which the new company becomes trounced by the even newer one. Now it's in months, right? There's never a dull moment.
It's also interesting how much this has become about national security now, too.
Yeah, indeed. So we haven't touched on that angle, but that's another thing so the national security angle is actually very important, right? But the notion that, but here's my view, right? Is that like, and again, you can go back to like physics and nuclear technology and whatnot. It's like, there's a level of research that you can't keep secret, and there's no advantage in keeping secret, right? And that, like in basic quantum mechanics, right? You can't keep quantum mechanics secret. They'll discover it, and people will share it, and blah blah blah. But then, like having quantum mechanics puts you on the path to making an atomic bomb, but still quite far from it. Right? I can know all the quantum mechanics in the world and not know how to make an atomic bomb. So
lots of practical problems.
Yeah, exactly. There's a big engineering problem. And again, like LLMs as a general purpose technology, I think trying to restrict them is pointless. And in fact, what the US wants to do, again, as with the chips, is like, on the contrary, like, it's interesting because the US usually does the opposite. It's like, we should be telling everybody, like, have all our LLMs for free, right? Like, propagate American culture, good or bad. Like, have our LLMs with all their Americanisms and have our chips, and let China, like, be dependent on this stuff, such that one day when then there's a confrontation, the US can go like, we're switching all of that stuff off, buddies. As opposed to motivating them to not be dependent on it in the first place. And then certain applications which exist and are important of, AI, just to say broadly, for national security, for intelligence, for blah, 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 those you keep maximally secret. But again, it's still going to be a race, which you might win or lose. But that is the way to play it. It's not trying to keep, Schrodinger's equation secret. it's just like ridiculous.
Right. A rough analogy is when Russia invaded Ukraine, the U.S. took Russia off of SWIFT and the banking transactions and just like gutted their economy to a degree. It's kind of like, hey, China, try to go to Taiwan, know what the Russian treatment was. Do you want to deal with that?
No, exactly. I mean, like, great example. Things like SWIFT are like, you have that power until you use it.
Yep.
Right.
Yep.
And now they're like, oh, we don't want to. Now developing their own network.
Yeah.
So what was gained by that in the end? Not much, right? So that was a bad move.
Yeah, it was
right?
a temporary.
Right.
Yeah. I mean, you should save that for the big one. And, with all the support for Ukraine is not the big one.
Right.
Ooh.
Yeah. So, well, Pedro, thank you for joining us. This is fantastic.
Very fun.
This is, make sure you check out his book, Silicon Valley 2040, A Satire. And then for folks who just want to learn about AI, but put it in common tongue understanding, check out the master algorithm. He has some beautiful examples of what's going on. And this book was made in 2015 and it's more relevant than ever. Definitely check it out. Thank you again, Pedro, for joining us to cut through all the hype regarding this hysteria. If you all enjoyed that episode, you think it's valuable for one of your teammates to see, please share it with them. We're going to talk about surgical robots and surgeon-in-the-loop robotics, because we always talk about human-in-the-loop AI, but there's also surgeon-in-the-loop robotics that's going on, which is really neat. That's for our bonus episode. So you get one free episode on Monday, and then Wednesday, to keep the lights on, we put our hour-long ad-free bonus episode behind a paywall. If you'd like to see that episode, go to patreon.com/SVIC and become a member for $5 a month to get access. So talk to you all later.